So my name is Jules Cobb. I work at Dawn Farm. I am one of the youth and family services therapists who works at Dawn Farm. This is our wonderful program coordinator, Ray Dalton. He oversees all of our outpatient office, so not only our youth program, but also our programs in the jail, our community corrections programs, our whole outpatient office. He does driving license reevaluations. I mean, I don't know where he fits everything into the day that he does, but he's a pretty amazing miracle in my opinion. Sorry, I have to praise you while I can. So we're here tonight to, we got asked to come and present to this wonderful little mini education series, right, that you guys attend. And we're happy to be here to talk with you about substance use, dependency, recovery as well. So we have a little overview. So Dawn Farm is a substance abuse treatment provider. We serve a lot of people in Washtenaw County. We've been around since 1973. We have 2 residential sites totaling 49 beds. We have our outpatient office. We have a detox house called Spera. We have outreach beds available for people that are needing a bed to stay before they can come into residential treatment and so forth. So we can pretty much meet anybody where they're at within their substance use problem that they're having. So tonight we're going to go over is substance use really a concern? We're going to talk about how it impacts the brain. We're going to differentiate between using a substance, misusing it, abusing it, and being dependent or addicted to it. We're going to learn about what facts there are about substance use, what it sounds like, what it looks like, the familiar behaviors that go along with it, what messages we might be sharing with others as we talk about substance use of various kinds, how to confront it, what do we say to people we care about or our loved ones, and then how does a person actually get into recovery and what does that look like? So we hope that's going to fit the bill.
And so what we hope people feel comfortable doing is if you have a question, I mean, it's a small enough group here that you just raise your hand, and I want to make sure that anybody who came tonight gets whatever questions they have, whatever issues might be going on, that they get them addressed. And we'll also hang out afterwards, and if you don't feel comfortable asking it in front of other people, please just grab myself or Jules, and we'd be happy to be able to give you whatever insights, knowledge that we may or may not have. And if we don't have the answers, we'll certainly we'll get those to you. And I'm not going to use the mic. Is everybody can hear me okay? Okay.
Can I not use the mic?
Yeah.
I have to shout loud. Is that okay? I'll go back to it if you can't hear me. Just let me know. Okay. All right, we'll get rolling. So, is it really a concern? It definitely is. When we look at statistics about young people that are using substances, we're finding that this is actually a study that came out of U of M, and monitoring the future study. It is still ongoing today, so they're still going and collecting data. But 8th graders in 2014, you can see what they reported using compared to that of 12th graders. And yeah, the numbers are a little bit different, but it's still pretty alarming to think that 11% of all 8th graders are using marijuana of some kind, and obviously that number is jumping up. The blue is illicit drugs, the green is pharmaceuticals. The pharmaceuticals that you can find in your own medicine cabinet at home, right? So just really, really scary drugs that people can get their hands on pretty easily today. You guys know this lady, right? Your state representative Driscoll obviously was just talking back in November about the problems with a lot of the overdoses that's happening today already within Washtenaw County. With I think it's 6 people now that's passed away just this year from heroin overdoses, and our hearts are breaking. So we do still need to be talking about it. And talking with other people that we care about.
And almost almost in every single solitary case, it started with prescription opioids and moved to heroin. When those prescription opioids didn't become readily available, people built up tolerance. they stop being able to get the prescription drugs, and then they move to heroin because it's it's unfortunately very available in this area.
So we've talked about why it's important, obviously, because there's these alarming statistics, but what impact does it actually have on a person? The younger a person is when they start using substances, the greater risk they're at of that substance use developing into a really heightened disorder. I take young people in treatment actually out into the schools with me, and we do a presentation in the schools, and I will ask them how old they were when they used their first drug, and they'll say, I was 12 years old and I smoked marijuana. That's usually the common theme that I get among people. Or I was, just last week I was 8 years old when I smoked my first cigarette. So these are like the types of situations that really could have some kind of substance use disorder progress, that initial awareness, that initial use of a substance. It's also alarming because it is a disease of young people. You don't very often hear that someone started having a substance use disorder when they're like 30 years old. They are starting as young as 12 years old, as young as 13 years old. Some people might have smoked their first cigarette at 8 years old. So it definitely is something that starts out really young in people, and it's just so scary because when the teenage brain is just developing at that fast rate that it's developing at, the impact of the drug use is slowing down that development, if not stopping it, the longer it continues to go on.
And so, when we look at this, it's a disease of young people, just as Jules said. Columbia University had a study that came out that showed that 90% of all individuals who suffer with a substance use disorder or suffer from addiction, 90% of those folks started before the age of 18 years old, right? And I mean, this is where it starts. It starts as teenage years, right? And it's a rarity. When I used to do this all the time. I used to work in the jails in Washtenaw County, and I'd oftentimes, as kind of an exercise, I would go around and ask people when their first time they started using was, and it was always 12 and 13 and 14 and 15 and 16 years old. I mean, always. I mean, and I would rarely, and all the times that I did that, would I get somebody who said I started at 25 or I started at 35. Now, does it happen? Sure, it does happen, but it's such a rarity. And there's even there's quite a few studies out there that have actually said that if you can delay the onset of use into the person's early 20s, mid 20s. Actually keep somebody, especially if they have a genetic predisposition towards addiction and a family history of addiction, you can really there's a greater likelihood that they're never going to have a substance use disorder.
So when you think about how scary it is for young people to be experimenting with the use of substances, we want to kind of let you guys know about how that's really working in the brain. Do you want to take this one?
So, what is driving the progression of it? Why is this a disease, right? And really, this is a disease of pleasure, right? And all substances go through the dopamine reward pathway, right? And dopamine is a neurochemical of pleasure. And our brains tend to, and I don't want to get too kind of belabor this too much. There's a really great ed series called Physiology of Addiction that Dr. Christensen, our medical director, does. So for folks who really want to get into the brain science of all of this, it's something that you can go and see in our ed series. But really, this is a brain disease of pleasure, and Dopamine is released every time there is something in our environment that is seen as, or for, that is created for survival, right? And so our brain releases dopamine every time, food is involved, social connection is involved, sex is involved, right?
Donuts are involved.
Donuts, right?
Fast cars.
And drugs come in and hijack this system. And addictive drugs create dopamine spikes, anywhere between 2 and 10 times more, 2 to 10 times more dopamine gets released in the brain every time drugs are released in the brain. And so what ends up happening is drugs of abuse hijack the midbrain, and ultimately what happens is drugs are equated with survival in the brain, right? And when this happens, the person will ultimately allow all areas of their life to be corroded when they become addicted to drugs or alcohol. And it really overrides the frontal cortex. And the frontal cortex is this part of the brain right here that is responsible for planning, and it's responsible for problem solving. And the midbrain, which is this kind of this limbic system, which is in the middle of the brain, it's really responsible for emotion, survival, etc. And what happens when things are going well is there's this kind of top-down processes that happens, and this part of the brain regulates this part of the brain. So just now, my brain was kind of freezing, and I had this kind of fight or flight response, and I wanted to run out of here, right? And so I literally that was what was happening right now. And so what happens is this part of the brain is telling me, hey, don't worry, calm down, everything's going to be fine, right? And it's creating this kind of top-down control over this fight or flight response of the brain. So what happens when drugs and alcohol start to become involved is that, and survival starts to take over, what happens is this limbic system kind of overrides this frontal cortex, right? And so, because of these large spikes in dopamine, this limbic system ultimately starts to believe that things are really important for survival. It'll override this part of the brain, and people will start to seek drugs, to crave drugs, to start to have a loss of control over their drug use, right? In regards to, this is kind of a simplified model of growth and human development. And so when, people face challenges, these are kind of coping skills, right? These arrows represent coping skills. So for every challenge, we create coping skills, and we're able to maneuver around difficult options, and we start to create this kind of growth and maturity cycle. And this doesn't really happen when drugs and alcohol start to get involved. Like, the train starts to get derailed. When my response to every single solitary challenge that I had a bad day at school today, I failed a test today, my girlfriend broke up with me, I got in a fight with my parents. If every single solitary time I meet a challenge with, I think I'll go get high, right? I think I'll go get stoned. We don't really get to be able to create those coping skills that create development and that create, meeting certain milestones and being able to maturate.
So again, to the level of where drugs and alcohol become problematic, we're looking at this. Well, there's definitely this level of drugs and alcohol being abused, right, at a certain degree. So it's either, if you advance the slide forward, actually, if a person is experiencing some of those consequences that Ray just talked about, even just the fighting that exists within families, or struggles with school and so forth, then a person is possibly abusing substances, right, which means that they might be using them for reasons other than they're intended, right, using drugs and alcohol. For example, a person might not be diagnosed with having ADHD, yet we know that Adderall is a frequently purchased medication in schools, right? So So if someone is buying somebody else's prescription, for example, they're abusing that substance, and it might be over the course of time using that substance, maybe adding other substances into the mix too, that consequences start to kind of, or actions start to be shown that are going to be have negative impact on school, negative impact in family relationships. So this is just basically saying, you know, people are able to use medications safely, right, following the guidelines that's on the bottle. Some people might misuse them and have a negative reaction to that and then recorrect the use the next time. Others might misuse it and say, hey, that was good, I think I'm going to go on to misuse or abuse something else going down the road. So, and then when the person gets this level of dependency, I mean, they might be misusing things. They might be taking substances illegally, right? If you're not 21 years old, you're not supposed to be drinking alcohol. You're not 18 years old, you're not supposed to be smoking cigarettes and so forth. The person is taking that to the next level and using those drugs, using alcohol in larger amounts over a longer period of time and more often. They've reached this level of dependency. And it's usually at that point where you can really tell that things are usually pretty bad at that point, right? When a person is dependent upon substances.
And so, what is important to note in a couple of these slides is oftentimes when people think about social use, they think about just using around people. So as long as I'm using around people, no matter how much I'm using or what I'm using, it's okay, right? And it's like, that's a misnomer. And, you know, social use really is, or use is, you know, when individuals will okay, I'll have a glass of wine, or I'll have a beer, or I'll have, whatever it is that they're having, with dinner or at on special occasions or what have you, right? So it's not about being able, as long as I'm around people, it's okay, right? Social, it's considered social use, right? And I want to say something about the dependence piece here too. The most important part about a dependence and the keys of dependence are kind of 3 C's, right? So it's craving, right, where the brain has you have a mental obsession, like you can't get it off your mind. It's a constant thing that you're thinking about. Loss of control, the second C, and continued use despite consequences. Like when you start to see those 3 things, what we're talking about is substance dependence, right? And when that happens, substance, which means they need the substance to continue on, right? They, in order to get out of bed, I meet with individuals who struggle with heroin addiction, opioid addiction all the time, and oftentimes they're well past getting high. They're no longer getting high on any of the substances, not even heroin. They're literally saying, I just need this to get out of bed. I need to be able to get, I need to get my, I need to be able to get to my job. I need to be able to get my responsibilities. I need to be able to just get up and go out and get more drugs. And if I don't have those if I don't have something in my system, I can't even function. I get really sick. Usually what happens is whatever the drug does to you when you're high, the withdrawal is the exact opposite. So whatever, if it brings them up, withdrawing brings you down. If it's a depressant, you can't sleep, so on and so forth.
So when a person is probably fallen into some area of this 10% grouping of people that struggle with addiction, Ray mentioned some of these things already, but when we do a lot of our assessments, we're talking to people about whether there's been any changes in any of these areas at all. So you can see just how, you can really see it does impact every single area of life, from basic living, really, even worrying about eating patterns as well, mood, attitudes, going into school, social activities. We're looking for one of these things alone is probably not enough on its own to indicate that there's a substance use problem that may exist with a person. So you're probably going to get a collection of these things that may be happening. And that's when definitely to put that flag up to figure out that, maybe I need to reach out and get some more help from someone.
So,
what happens? You already said it doesn't happen because people are bad parents. Poor parents. It's not a cause for this chemical dependency, for this disease at all. We know that there's a big genetic component to this disease. So if there's a history of any kind of substance use disorders in the bloodline of families, right? That could be something that contributes to another person that may possibly struggle with this disease. But it's not anyone's fault that it's happening at all. Not at all.
And people oftentimes look at, they always they come into treatment asking, what's the reason? What's the underlying reason? Why are you doing this? What caused all of this, right? And oftentimes, we put way too much emphasis on the reason why things happen and not enough emphasis on what do we do now? We know it's a problem now, so what do we do now, right? Because reasons change and that's kind of stuff that gets fleshed out, after, a person is sober for years. They, and the reasons will start to come up, maybe it was a little bit of this, maybe it was a little bit of that. And there's probably usually multiple, kind of things that may have been able to curtail it, prevent it. Oftentimes it's the early onset of use. Really that's one of the key factors of chemical dependency. But the focus should be on how to help them. What do I do now that I know there's a problem?
So what do we do now? Even from the point on when a person may determine that there is a problem, how do you move forward? So it's always good to evaluate what your message is saying about substance use. Do you feel that marijuana isn't a big deal? And if so, what is that conveying to other people that you might come into contact with, right? So it's always good to evaluate what you're saying, what you're saying yourself. Ray's already talked about consequences and the minute we don't address a problem when it's happening, then that's the minute that a person is getting the message that, hey, I can kind of keep doing what I'm doing. So it's always really wise to confront anything related to substance use problems in the moment that they're happening with the power that it needs, with the emphasis that it needs, with that concreteness that it needs, and have it just be very meaningful. To be on the same team with people, we struggle when in some of our family therapy sessions when we've got parents that aren't on the same page as each other. And it's extremely difficult. So, really working together to get in alignment. If you really want to help your loved one, or the person you care about in your life, it has to be a joint effort to make that successful. And figuring out how to get help from whatever outside sources there are, and it says up there, avoid using guilt, shame, and blame, because a person that is at that level of dependency on substances, they're feeling enough of that already. They don't need to have it added and rubbed into their face at all, because they'll just want to go out and keep using some more. So it has to come from this place of love and care, but again, have that emphasis on the importance of it, the concreteness of it.
So, if you want to know if somebody is abusing a substance or heavily using a substance or misusing a substance versus them being addicted to a substance, being chemically dependent on that substance, what you really will want to do is you'll want to establish rules around what the expectations are. What are the rules in the house? What are my expectations for the other person, right? And you communicate those in a very concrete fashion, like these are what our expectations are, and set consequences. And if that consequence is great enough, right? And so if being on the wrestling team is really important to somebody, or being being in the school play, or having that driver's license, or going to prom, or getting that cell phone, or staying in that relationship with that other person, or that job is really important to that person, whatever that thing is. And if you say, if you continue to use, right, this thing is going to be taken away. That person who says, oh, you got it, I'm done, I'm quitting, you won't see me doing that anymore, right? You've got somebody who is likely going to be in that misuse, heavy use, abuse category, somewhere on that, on that continuum. If the person immediate response is, you can't do this to me, absolutely not, yada yada, and or they try to find other ways of using. They try to get around it. They try to get around drug tests. They try to switch their substances. They try to hide their use from you. Then you really have kind of a different kind of animal on your hands, right? You've got something a little bit different, and so that usually means that the person is struggling with addiction.
And that's kind of going into what some of these really behaviors are right here, right? If you're setting out those consequences and you're still seeing a lot of those behaviors that Ray just mentioned, which kind of fall into a lot of these categories on the left-hand side here, then yeah, it is a big beast that you're fighting. And sometimes if you're a single parent, or you find that you don't have enough support around you for the help that you need in order to deal with what's happening, Al-Anon is a fantastic place to go to get support. There's meetings everywhere. There's a fantastic meeting over at the Zion Lutheran Church in Ann Arbor on a Wednesday night. It's a huge meeting. They have an ALA team meeting there too, so you can actually get help for the siblings of people that might be struggling with some kind of substance use disorders. At the same time, there's an AA meeting that goes on there as well. So you got the person who's struggling with the disease, the family members of that person who is struggling through that disease with them. That everyone can get help right there and then, and help and support. So a great resource. But it's hard to it's hard to keep up with all these things. Even today, there's so many new things that are coming, that are that people are learning about, that scientists are developing. It's hard to stay up to date on what's happening. Even just e-cigarettes, right? E-cigarettes, hookah pens, vaping, all that kind of thing. Those are all substances that are not regulated by the government in any way. So we have no clue as to what's in the ingredients of those juices that are getting put into those pens and so forth. We don't know the harmful effects that they might be having on the body in any way, but we do know, because research is starting to show that a person that's using those hookah pens, those e-cigarettes, they are habit forming, but we don't yet know of the consequences that's coming along with them. So that's kind of like a stay tuned and keep looking out for more research that's coming through with that. But they can be, nicotine is obviously just as highly addictive as any other substance do. So to keep up to date on all the information that's out there. So if all this is like bells are going off in people's heads, like, yeah, I got to figure out what we need to do here. We got a little piece on how we move forwards from this point forwards. So, do you want me to cover this, or do you want that one?
Sure. I mean, if you're concerned about, yourself, loved one who may be struggling with substance use disorder, the best thing you can do is get them to an assessment. There are a lot of great places in this community to be able to do that. And so what we always say that get some outside help here, because oftentimes our love for that person can leave us less than objective, and so it's good to be able to get kind of an objective assessment from somebody who's a professional. And what is going to happen at that assessment is they're going to do one or two things. They're going to diagnose the person with a substance use disorder, or they're going to say there's no diagnosable substance use disorder present. And so if there's no diagnosable substance use problem, oftentimes what they'll do is say, hey, well, maybe there's some kind of mental health stuff. Maybe there's some family counseling that needs to be done. Maybe there's you just need to establish rules, enforce those rules, set those consequences. You maybe need prevention or education. We have lots and lots of prevention and education in this community for teens, for adults for that matter. And then you just kind of take a wait and see approach. If as long as things seem to be getting better, then there's nothing really to be too concerned about.
And also, if you set those consequences, then the person is probably their flag is going to go like, I don't want to have those consequences every single day for the rest of my life, so they might be able to change their behavior at that point. But if there is a problem,
if there is a diagnosable problem, we oftentimes tell people that they should attend, probably first and foremost, probably attend AA or NA. And the reason why we oftentimes tell people to do this is William White talks about this, that people need 5 years of continuous supportive treatment or continuous support before relapse rates drop below 15%. So to have an 85% success rate, you need to be in some kind of continuous supportive services for 5 years, right? Dawn Farm, if you come into our residential site and then you go through our 2 years of transitional housing, you can be with us for roughly about 2 years and 3 months, and maybe some change there, right? That's still only gets you, halfway to that 5 year mark, right? And the only thing that can be consistently there with somebody for 5 years, and he's saying this is 5 years for usually folks who struggle with alcoholism. He's actually saying that number's got to be more like 7 years, especially if you struggle with an opioid addiction, right? And William White is somebody who wrote this great book called Slaying the Dragon. He is kind of the guru for addiction treatment in America. And so the only thing that's going to be able to be there for that long a period of time is community support, mutual support, AA, NA, smart recovery, these other recovery sites. So we always kind of put that in that's always part of the equation. And then if it's kind of middle stage addiction, earlier addiction, outpatient therapy, maybe if it's, if there's a little bit more that's needed, we have intensive outpatient therapy that we refer people onto. That's usually about 9 hours a week of outpatient treatment. And then if the outpatient treatment, the person needs more structure, their addiction is advanced a little bit, or they have a lot of other kind of other factors, mental health symptoms that are exacerbating their use, things like that, then we might look at like inpatient treatment, right? And so people can be in inpatient. Some places will have people in inpatient for 7 days, 14 days, and some people can be in inpatient treatment for many months, right? Dawn Farm has our inpatient treatment is usually about 90 days.
So a person is getting help through, whatever various sources of support and treatment that there may be out there. You can usually typically have those behaviors those problematic behaviors that are associated with substance use disorders over here, you can usually switch those around, and those can actually change over to some really positive traits that a person will have going forward. And that, you know, you're looking at a really unhappy, miserable person over here, and you're looking at someone who's just like on, you know, just the happiest person on the face of the earth, getting that support. They've got people around them every day that understands what it's like to be going through what they're going through. Maybe a person that's lived in their shoes, and that can just listen to them without any bias, discrimination, or anything. And then when they've got those people in their life, they can typically find hope in their life instead of derailing. You know, they find that when they put this recovery piece back in with all the help group, they can then learn once again how to learn skills that they need to do to face challenges that they're having, instead of using the skill of using and being dependent upon substances. So things can actually turn around in a pretty remarkable way with the right kind of help and support in place.
This is one of the best probably places you can, I mean, there's so much recovery in this county. I mean, it's one of the best places that you can be, maybe even in the country, to be in recovery from a substance use disorder.
It's the first or the second best recovery community.
Yeah. It's extremely large. There's meetings on every, on every every church and every community building,
hospitals,
all across town.
Yeah. This is our farm. It's our barn. You can rent it out for events. You can't take any alcohol or drugs with you. You can rent it out. It's a beautiful barn. This is how to get hold of Ray and myself should you have any questions going forwards. There's one other flyer I put out on the front. It's kind of got a lot of suggested reading material, or it's got phone numbers and email addresses for AA, NA, MA kind of meetings, how to get hold of us. That's on that piece of paper too. So grab one of those if you don't already have one. And if you need anything from us going forwards, then that's how to get hold of us for sure. We're around. If you just have a question tomorrow, it's like, hey, I didn't think to ask you to call us up. Shoot us an email, whatever it is. We're around. I love doing what I do every day that I go to the office or to school, wherever I'm going to. So it's here. It's good. So thanks for having us. And if you have any questions,
we're around. We're happy to answer any questions that you might have now, and if there's no questions, we'll hang out a little bit afterwards, and maybe on a one-on-one basis, I can do a little bit better job explaining some of the brain stuff that I was having a panic attack about.
In the middle. And everyone seemed like they understood that.
So, anyways, any questions that you might have, I'd be happy to answer.
How like I watch Intervention and stuff like that. Yeah. How true are those type of, is that what you see too? Those type of severe addictions? I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
Is that what they look like?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I haven't watched a ton of Intervention, and it the ones that I've seen, it's
you
like,
see it in real life.
It's the mailman going for a walk, right, kind of thing. After work, it's so one of the, I've seen a couple of episodes, and they're somewhat sensationalistic, but the ones that I've seen, it looks like, I mean, they're picking up people who are late stage,
right.
addicts and alcoholics, right? So folks who have to wake up first thing in the morning, have shaky hands, will start to go through delirium tremens if they don't don't start drinking. They have to leave work and they have to drink to be able to function at work. Folks who are using yes. I started out at Dog Farm working at our detox center, and you see folks coming in who are near death, and unfortunately we've seen a lot of people who have died from this disease, and it's sad. And it's sad how many young people you see dying of this disease, and you hear people who are barely 30 years old and who are in the process of dying of liver failure. You know, I mean, it's just, I mean, it's sad stuff.
One of the scariest ones I saw was an inhalant one.
Mm.
I mean, I just thought that was,
And
the guy was scary.
you want to talk about inhalants. I mean, that tends to be some of the first substances that young people use, because you can, and I don't want to say where and what or anything like that, but like it's one of the things that you see that you can go and buy at a store and be able to find in this school, and so on and so forth. So
He even had burn marks on his fingers from the inhalant substance getting too cold, and it was just, the guy was scary.
Yep. It is. It's really scary, and it's one of those. It's one of those substances that. I mean, between that and methamphetamines causes a great deal of significant brain damage that it's very difficult to come to have that brain heal from those substances. The brain. What is great about the brain is that there's this thing called neuroplasticity, and it'll recognize deficits in the brain, and then other parts of the brain will start to take over functioning for that damaged part of the brain. And what we used to believe was that the brain, once you kill the brain cell was dead forever, right? And that was what you were told when I was growing up. That was what was told: lose a brain cell, you're done, right? Well, actually, they found that that's not true, right? That you can regenerate brain cells, and people do regenerate brain cells, and so people's brains do heal from the damage that is done from these toxins, from alcohol use, chronic alcohol use, chronic drug use. So, yeah.
I mean,
Which is a good thing. Good news.
Yeah, just thinking about that too. I mean, what if a person is going into residential treatment? They're looking at maybe up to 6 months before the brain just starts to act in a normal functioning way after they stop using substances.
So these large spikes in dopamine that the brain gets from these from drugs, right? They're greater than the brain was ever meant to have. And so what ends up happening is that the brain starts to reset its pleasure set point, right? So it's called the hedonic set point. And so it raises what it believes to be pleasurable, right? And so normally pleasurable things no longer register when the person stops, because that pleasure set point has been set higher, right? So these like smaller spikes in dopamine where the person is that food, that companionship, that doing the things that they used to love to do, going to baseball games and listening to music, that stuff doesn't quite register anymore until that brain is able to heal and the hedonic set point comes back down, right? And so it does happen, right? But you're looking at 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, a year, sometimes 2 years, depending on how long you've used the substance and what you were using, right? Methamphetamines, again, being one of those that it takes the longer for the brain to end up healing. But yeah. Questions? That time I think I did a little bit better job talking about it.
You don't live in a brain. You love that stuff.
I do.
I'm like, go listen to the Physiology of Addiction 101.
I do, but I'm not a great speaker, so there's the rub.
I don't think that's true.
Any other questions? We'll hang out afterwards. Thank you so much.